A lot going on. Boris Johnson, yes, indeed, party leader. Well, he's not the head of the party leader, but he's still very much the Prime Minister. Let's go back now to talk to Professor Tim Wilson. We've managed to connect with him again. Professor Tim Wilson, thanks again.
Hello.
All right, good to see you. So my first question, just to remind our viewers, was, yeah, for the last few days we've been hearing a lot about, he's about to go, question time. Keir Starmer's pushing that pressure on. What was it? My question was, what was it that broke the camel's back? What was it that made him say, wake up this morning and go, you know what? They don't want me anymore. Let me resign.
Well, I think the sheer number of resignations, I think Mrs. Thatcher had about 25 resignations over a period of just over 11 years. Mrs. May had about 35 or something over the period of 3 years. Boris had over 50 resignations in one day. That, I think, is a record. That is astonishing. I think in terms of the scandals, the thing that went really wrong was the Chris Pincher scandal. I mean, I think it's extraordinary that there was so much sleaze surrounding Boris himself that the real thing that seems to have brought him down was a sleaze scandal around somebody else, and that Boris was tried very hard to wriggle out of it and to say, well, he didn't know about the sleaze that surrounded this person. This person had form. This person had been groping other people before the event in the Carlton Club a few days ago. And so Boris knew, and it took a civil servant to write a letter the beginning of this week saying not only did Boris know, but there was evidence that Boris knew, and at that point it became clear that Boris had been sending senior ministers out to the television cameras to lie on his behalf. Now, I don't think that there's a lot of talk in the news about Boris being untruthful, Boris lying, and so on. I don't think that's the primary problem. The primary problem was that he lost trust. And equally, I don't think Boris necessarily is a bad person. I think Boris has relied on a huge number of incredibly weak ministers, who I suspect he appointed because he thought that would make him look good. So, in the end, Boris tried for so long to be Prime Minister, when it came to the point, he simply didn't know what to do. And, maybe from that point of view, history will say there's shades of Gordon Brown. But I don't think fundamentally he's a bad person. I think fundamentally he's a flawed individual who had enormous potential, and he squandered it on fripperies, on wallpaper, on trying to please other people. I mean, if you go back and look at his leaving speech today, his leaving speech was an extraordinarily fine piece of honesty. It was actually not rhetorical at all. It was straightforward. It was about content. It was reflective. It was direct. Maybe suddenly, too late, he's realised that the sophistry doesn't work, and that it's time to come clean. History will be debating this question.
A little bit too late, though. Don't you think? Come clean. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about this. The Chris Pincher thing. Do you think that the way the government is run these days? I mean, it's very much the old school, the old Eton boys, sort of like slap on the back, squeeze of the bottom. It's only a little bit of tomfoolery. It won't harm anyone, but that's not very much the modern day anymore. I mean, especially when we're talking about gender pronouns, we're talking about a very modern, different world. And of course, all forms of harassment in the workplace is harassment. But are we looking at an old school guard here? Are people like Boris Johnson and I don't know, perhaps the Theresa Mays or the David Camerons? Are they, just because they're from a good school, are they bound to be just leaders?
No, and I think There's one lady who really sums this up, because Nadine Dorries, who's the Minister for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, an absurd ministry. I don't know why all these things are lumped together. It's possibly because nobody else thinks they're important. And she's had an appalling record as Minister for that bunch of things. David Cameron and George Osborne for being rich boys, for being posh boys in government. And yet, you can't think of another person who was a more earnest cheerleader. She was the arch cheerleader for Boris, who comes from the same posh school, from the same Eton. But, I go back to the thing that I don't think it's to do with his background. I don't think it's to do with the idea that he set out to be Prime Minister. I think it's to do with some sort of character flaw. He felt that it was necessary to surround himself with incompetence. And Nadine Dorries is a prime example of that, gaffe-prone to the end. I mean, only recently she rugby union in a speech to rugby players, just utter madness. Oh. And in fact, all his ministers, Liz Truss, you mentioned Liz Truss earlier. Liz Truss, the current Foreign Secretary, she behaved appallingly when she tried to play chicken with Sergei Lavrov. Such a seasoned diplomat, and she didn't know that Rostov-on-Don was a major city in Russia. Not in Ukraine. He called her bellicose. And as a result of this, I think, Boris took over the diplomatic work in Ukraine. Boris was the figurehead for the Ukraine movement, and he did that superbly well. But he saw it necessary to sideline his foreign secretary. I don't see that she has a chance at becoming Prime Minister with that record, and equally, we've got 4 people who are facing the death penalty for going over to Ukraine and on her encouragement fighting for the Ukrainians, and she hasn't been able to reach out to Russia to intercede for them or to make any sort of diplomatic effort because she is so gaffe prone. Right. I just find her behaviour is typical of the sort of people that Boris has surrounded himself with. Dominic Raab, you mentioned him earlier. Mm. Dominic Raab was sunning himself on a Cretan beach when the Afghan crisis kicked off, and he didn't return to the UK. That is unforgivable. Right. Ben Wallace certainly picked up the pieces, but and then you've got people like Gavin Williamson, who was an appalling education secretary, utterly inept, and he was kept on and paid off with a knighthood. I don't understand how Boris can have been so loyal to so many morally questionable, ethically emasculated and incompetent ministers.
Because they were just old school buddies. That's why. It's how it rolls, isn't it? I mean, you scratch my back, I scratch yours.
I really don't think these people. When you meet Boris, you realise Boris is an independent. He doesn't need this crowd of cheerleaders around him, but he seems to have felt it necessary while he was Prime Minister, and I think that is what has brought him down. It's been necessary for months. These people should have been sacked, and Boris has failed to take that decision. They didn't vacate their posts, so he had to leave his. I think it's a very simple situation. I would definitely call for Boris's resignation, but I would have called for the resignation of Priti Patel, Liz Truss, Nadine Dorries, Dominic Raab, Michael Gove, all of these people long before I expected Boris to go.
All right,
and yet he kept them in place.
Before we get to a new leader, Tim, what happens in these next few months? We have July. I guess everybody just closes. Government sort of like closes the door. Someone switches the lights off. We're off on our summer holes. We'll be back in a month. But what happens in September and October, maybe before November, before we actually get a new party leader? Is there? Sorry,
yes.
go on.
I think it will happen. I think it will happen much sooner. I think a new leader will be in place by mid-September. In the next 2 weeks, the 2 weeks before government closes down, before Parliament closes down for the summer, the party will be having very quick elections to narrow down the hopefuls to two, and these two will then be given to the party loyalists, those people who are signed up to the Conservative Party, to vote. So it will be a popular vote, but by the paid-up members of the Conservative Party, and that vote, I would imagine, would take place early in September. And I think your list of candidates is very accurate, but I think you're right. Dominic Raab doesn't stand a chance because of his background. I think Jeremy Hunt...
Before we get, I do want to talk about that in a bit more detail. Let's first listen again to the London residents that shared their views on Boris Johnson's resignation. So have a quick listen to that, and then we'll come back, Tim, if you don't mind.
I'm a Conservative, but Boris has to go. He's a disgrace. And I was listening to Radio 4 this morning, and if 5 ministers go in the space of an hour, I can't believe what he's doing, and it's very bad for the country.
I'm just surprised it took him so long, really. Yesterday I thought it would probably come, but yeah, by the end of the day it seemed like he was just going to keep on, but I guess he's figured it out that it's time for him to go.
I don't think things will get better for a long time. Things have to get really, really worse before they get better. I think it's going to take at least 18 months to 2 years for things to get better.
I don't know. I think because it's just going to be Tories in still, isn't it? So it doesn't make a difference. I think Dominic Raab should resign.
I think that was the right response. I think there's a lot of people that are against him. Obviously, when the cabinet members started to resign, I think it was really time for him to go.
It's a good thing if we improve him for better, you know what I'm saying? Because if someone is going to take the place and do the same as him, it's no improvement at all. So good luck for the next one.
So there you go, Tim. Lots of different voices out there. Most people seem to be happy that there is going to be a change in government. Out of the 7 I mentioned, if you could put if I gave you £1 to put a bet on who's going to come out winning, which one would it be? Would it be I don't know? Would it be Penny Mordaunt or Jeremy Hunt or I don't know Rishi Sunak? Let me just give you the 7 that I chose. It was Penny Mordaunt, it was Jeremy Hunt, it was Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, Tom Tugendhat, who I don't know what he does actually. I hadn't heard of him until I looked it up. Dominic Raab and Ben Morris. I think we can rule out Dominic Raab. So you've got a 7 to 1 chance. So what does your pound? What does your pound go on?
My pound probably would go on Ben Wallace, but he wouldn't necessarily be the person I would prefer. My temptation would be towards Tom Tugendhat, and I'm so sorry you don't know more about him. He's been very inspirational, I think, partly because he has that soldiering background, which he shares with Ben Wallace, which is probably why I would favour Ben Wallace. But he doesn't have cabinet experience, which I think is going to be a big disadvantage. The big problem with Boris in the last year has been that he hasn't appointed people from the backbenches, and so they haven't had that cabinet experience, and therefore the pool of people who can succeed him is very small indeed, and it's very introspective. I would be concerned if I think it's unlikely that Jeremy Hunt would become the next leader. He is in many ways a figure of fun. I think Penny Mordaunt, I don't think she's seen as strong enough. I know she has a certain amount of support. I don't think it's strong enough. Rishi Sunak, I think, has damaged goods. And if you look at Rishi Sunak's resignation, you could say, yes, Rishi Sunak has got his people lined up to fight a campaign. But I see a huge parallel between Rishi Sunak and Nigel Lawson, who resigned in 1988 and really was the beginning of the end of Mrs. Thatcher's tenure. I mean, it dragged on a little bit longer. Not in 1980, a little later than that. Remember in 1988, Nigel Lawson put forward this incredible radical budget and massive tax cuts, greatly simplified the tax system, and then the economy overheated. Everything went very wrong. And I think the parallels there with Sunak are striking. Lawson eventually resigned over Alan Walters, and if you look at Mrs. Thatcher's autobiography, she says that she had a time marked for him to meet her at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but he resigned just before that. And she was going to say, well, Alan Walters is already going to resign. So in fact, the two of them, Walters and Lawson, resigned on the same day. What does that tell us? It just tells us that Lawson might have won that battle, but the reality was he just wanted out. These people are human, and I think nobody wants to have been praised as the great saviour, as Lawson was, as Rishi Sunak was, and then suddenly find within a very short space of time their name is mud.
Indeed, Tim. I'm sad.
I think.
Got it. Brilliant, Tim. Honestly, pleasure talking to you. Sadly, we've run out of time. I wish we could talk for hours more. Thank you so much for joining me here on this special programme. We'll talk again soon, no doubt. Now, just to remind you...